there was a remarkable period from the 14th century to the 12th century BCE where there really was a time of international peace in the Near East, that the great powers of the time, and this was Egypt, which is well known of course, but also Hatti, which is in what is now Turkey, Mitanni, which is in what is now Syria, Babylonia, which is in what is now Iraq, and later Assyria, which is in northern Iraq. These great powers interacted with one another through diplomacy rather than warfare, and they created a really an early version of the UN almost, where each one of them was bound to the others by peace treaties, where they sent envoys back and forth to one another's courts. They would send gifts. They intermarried, very much like sort of Europe with the Queen Victoria's grandchildren, you know, marrying everybody. It was very, very much like that, where there was a lot of intermarriage between these families, again to reinforce the peace between them. And they didn't go to war against one another for long periods of time. It wasn't a completely peaceful time. There certainly were outbreaks of warfare occasionally, but compared to most of ancient history, it really was a time, a very conscious desire for peace. And they would write about this. And the best evidence for it is in some letters that were actually written by these kings to one another that were found in Egypt. And they're called the Amarna letters. They reflect the king's concerns, and the concerns are not ever about the military. They never threaten one another. There's nothing bellicose in those letters. They get angry with one another for not sending nice enough gifts. You know, you promised me more gold and I'm expecting it still. But mostly there is this sense between them that they are benefiting from the peace, that they appreciate it and they want it to continue. And they talk about this brotherhood between them. They didn't have a term for alliance other than brotherhood. They saw themselves as brothers. And it really is not what people expect the ancient world to be like. I think one often has the image that it was just one long war. You know, the people were always fighting. And it's just not true. Right from 2400 BCE, we have evidence of diplomacy. We know that they were trying to create peace between themselves. And 1,000 years later, that system is still in place. That's when this international age begins. And it was a system that was invented probably in Syria, actually, perhaps in Mesopotamia, one or the other, Syria or Iraq. And once it had been established there, they continued it. They had this goal of peace. Even when they were at war with one another, they would have peace treaties with their allies to fight against someone else. Then when Egypt gets involved in the 14th century, Egypt just signs on. They wrote in cuneiform. The Egyptians never wrote in cuneiform. They wrote in hieroglyphs. But for this purpose, for their international relations, they wrote in cuneiform. They adopted the idea of sending these envoys back and forth. They adopted the idea of even this idea of equality between the states, that they were equals, that none of them was more powerful than the other. Now, the Egyptians certainly thought they were more powerful, but they were willing in this context to accept that they were the brother kings of these other great kings of the time, and to because of the benefits that resulted of being at peace with them and not at war with them. And it wasn't until the real crisis at the end of the what's called the Late Bronze Age in the 12th century BCE that this fell apart. And it didn't fall apart because anyone became more warlike, really. It fell apart because of a whole lot of different factors that may have included famine, may have included drought, perhaps epidemics, and then the system did fall apart. And then, of course, wars did begin. But for a long period of time up until then, they managed to maintain it.